Now I'm going to tell you something that isn't written in history books. Have you ever wondered how the Vikings survived the coldest and darkest nights without firewood or electricity? Their methods will surprise you. When the polar night descends on the fjords and the temperature drops to unimaginable levels, modern people turn on the heating and lights. But imagine a world without electricity, central heating, or even enough firewood. This was the reality for the Scandinavians of the Viking Age, who not only survived but thrived in conditions that we would consider deadly. They did not fight winter, they became part of it, using knowledge passed down from generation to generation. Their homes, clothing, and daily habits were honed to perfection for one purpose: to survive the darkness and cold. It was a quiet, daily war, in which the main weapon was not steel, but ingenuity. Watch the video to the end to learn how the architecture of the Longhouse turned people's breath into a source of heat, and why simple wool was more effective than modern high-tech fabrics. What if I told you that everything you believed about Viking houses was wrong? We are used to thinking of the Longhouse as simply a primitive dwelling. But in fact, it was not just a building, but a complex social and psychological fortress that protected not only from the cold, but also from the madness of the long polar night. The entire community, from the chieftain to the lowest worker, gathered inside this huge, elongated structure.
Deep, brother, the night is cold.
Ay, may your harvest be plentiful.
Dozens of people lived under one roof, and this was the first and foremost secret to survival. The combined warmth of human bodies in a confined space significantly increased the overall temperature. It was a space of continuous activity that did not quiet down even in the middle of the night. The men carved wood and repaired tools and weapons, while the women spun wool and wove. This constant activity not only generated additional heat, but also prevented people from sinking into apathy from the eternal darkness.
I swear the bear was twice the size of this longhouse.
The house was not just a shelter, but the center of the universe for its inhabitants during the long winter months. Here, sagas were told, news was shared, agreements were made, and people simply socialized. This social interaction was as important to survival as warm clothing.
Ha ha! Another horn of mead for our guest.
Indeed. May your journey be swift.
The walls of the Longhouse protected not so much from the wind as from feelings of isolation and fear. The Vikings understood that the main battle in winter was not fought outside, but inside the human mind. Unity and a common goal were their main shield. When the icy wind howled outside, inside the house there was an atmosphere of orderly, communal life. Everyone knew their place and their task, and this strict routine brought stability to the chaos of the polar night. No one was left alone with the cold and darkness.
The stew is ready. Come and eat.
Thank you. That warms the soul.
That is why the Longhouse was not just a dwelling. It was a living organism, a social ark that carried its inhabitants through the darkest and coldest times of the year. Its main secret was not in its architecture, but in its people. Their world was built on interdependence, where the survival of each individual depended on the well-being of all. This philosophy was woven into the very fabric of their society and their homes. Winter only intensified this feeling, making it tangible. Thus, the first step to overcoming winter was not building walls, but creating a strong community. The warmth of the hearth was important, but the warmth of human relationships was vital. This was their unconventional approach.
We must remember the old ways, for they are the roots that hold us strong against the winter winds. The harvest depends on our unity.
I'm very interested to hear your point of view. How important do you think community cohesion is for survival in extreme conditions today? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
To the gods, to the ancestors, and to the bonds that hold us together. Skål!
Are you ready to learn the truth about how the Vikings built houses that literally heated themselves? The design of the longhouse was the result of centuries of observation and experimentation. Every element of its architecture was aimed at maximizing the conservation of precious heat. The walls of a longhouse were often built using frame technology, but with one important addition. The space between the wooden posts was filled with wattle covered with clay, and the outside of the house was covered with a thick layer of turf. This layer could be up to 1 meter thick, turning the house into a kind of dugout. Turf, or peat, has excellent thermal insulation properties that are comparable to many modern materials. It protected not only from the cold, but also from the piercing wind. In winter, this layer was covered with snow, which created an additional air cushion and insulated the dwelling even better. Traditional longhouses had virtually no windows. The only openings were low, narrow doorways, which were covered with thick skins and a smoke hole in the roof. This radically reduced heat loss, although it made the interior very dark. The roofs were also covered with turf, which was laid on a layer of birch bark for waterproofing. Such a massive green roof retained heat well, preventing it from escaping upwards. In addition, its weight made the entire structure more resistant to strong winds. The shape of the house, long and narrow, was also not accidental. It allowed heat from the central hearth to be distributed efficiently throughout the living space. People and sleeping places were located along the walls, leaving the center for fire and work. The floor in a longhouse was earthen, but it was often covered with straw or dry grass. This layer served as additional insulation from the cold ground. In addition, it absorbed moisture and was easily replaced as needed.
Stew is nearly ready.
Good, the children are hungry.
The entire structure was designed to be as airtight as possible. Low ceilings and small room volumes, with the exception of the central hall, allowed them to heat up faster and retain heat longer. It was a passive heating system that worked thanks to clever engineering. But the house was only half the battle. What if the real secret to their warmth was hidden not in the walls, but in the clothes they wore, made from a material with unique properties? In the next chapter, we will reveal the secrets of the Viking wardrobe.
Storm is heavy. Stay close to the path.
I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the Viking wardrobe, and it has nothing to do with horned helmets. Their real armor against the cold was clothing, specifically wool. But it was not the soft, processed wool we are used to, but a coarse, greasy fabric with almost magical properties. The secret was lanolin, a natural fat found in sheep's wool. The Vikings processed the wool as little as possible, preserving the maximum amount of this substance. Lanolin made their clothes virtually waterproof, which was critical in a damp and cold climate. Instead of wearing one thick garment, the Vikings used the principle of layering. This method is used today by all manufacturers of high-tech clothing for extreme conditions. But the Scandinavians discovered it for themselves more than 1,000 years ago.
It is freezing out here.
Indeed. Is the longship ready for the tide? We must leave soon.
The first layer against the skin was usually a linen shirt. Linen absorbs moisture well and wicks it away from the body, leaving the skin dry. This was important because wet skin freezes much faster.
This fur will keep the chill away.
Make sure your hood is tight, son.
One or more woolen tunics were worn over the linen shirt. An air layer was created between these layers. It was this still air, heated by body heat, that was the main insulator, not the fabric itself. The outer garment was a heavy woolen cloak, or clek. It was also impregnated with lanolin and protected against wind, rain, and snow. The cloak was a versatile item. During the day, it protected against the weather, and at night, it served as a blanket. The feet were insulated just as carefully. They wore woolen pants and wraps that were tightly wrapped around the shins over the trousers. This not only provided extra warmth, but also protected against snow getting into their shoes. It is important to understand that their clothing was never too tight. The loose fit promoted better air circulation and created those very insulating air pockets. They intuitively understood the laws of thermodynamics. This clothing system was the result of centuries of adaptation to the harsh climate. Every element was well thought out and functional. There was nothing superfluous or random in a Viking's wardrobe. Thus, Viking clothing was not just a set of items, but a complex engineering system. It allowed them to stay dry and warm even in the most extreme conditions. This invisible armor enabled them to operate where others could only freeze. What I am about to show you was the center of the universe for every Viking family.
See how the flames dance. They remember the old gods.
Will the gods protect us this winter, Grandfather?
At the heart of the longhouse was a hearth, but it was not the fireplace we are familiar with. It was a so-called langeld, or long fire, an open hearth stretching several meters along the central axis of the house. This shape was not accidental and was extremely practical. It allowed for heating the maximum area and gave access to the fire to a large number of people at the same time. All life revolved around it. Cooking, working, socializing.
It is good to finally rest by the fire. Aye, and the stew is nearly ready. What a day!
The langeld was the main and often the only source of light in the dark space of the longhouse. Its flickering flame illuminated people's faces, tools, and household items, creating a unique, lively atmosphere. It was a miniature sun during the endless polar night.
The sun abandoned us that year. Only the warmth of the Longeld kept the ice from claiming our soul.
Fuel was not always easy to come by in Scandinavia, especially in the treeless regions of Iceland. Therefore, the Vikings were masters of economy. They used not only wood, but also peat, which burned slowly and gave off a lot of heat. The smoke from the hearth rose and escaped through a special opening in the roof, located directly above the fire. This system was far from perfect, and the interior of the house was often filled with smoke. But it was an acceptable price to pay for warmth and light. The design of the smoke vent was also well thought out. It often had a small wooden chimney that could be adjusted to reduce draft and keep more heat inside. It was a simple but effective ventilation system. Benches were arranged around the fire, serving as seats, workplaces, and beds. At night, people slept as close to the heat source as possible. The cloaks they covered themselves with caught the heat from the coals that smoldered all night. Fire also had a sacred meaning. It was considered sacred, connecting the world of humans with the world of gods. Maintaining the fire was an important duty on which the life of the entire community depended.
Steader now. The flame must never die, for it holds the spirits of our ancestors.
The long fire was not just a source of heat. It was the beating heart of the home, around which all material and spiritual life revolved. It provided food, light, warmth, and a sense of security.
Warmth holds the cold at bay tonight.
Aye, and the bread is fresh from the oven this morn.
But how did they cope with the smoke that constantly filled the room? In the next chapter, you will learn how they found food when the ground was frozen solid. Survival in winter begins in summer. The Vikings understood this truth perfectly well, and the entire warm season was devoted to preparing food for the long, cold months. Their pantries were a real strategic reserve on which life depended. The basis of the winter diet was fish, primarily cod. It was caught in huge quantities and preserved by drying in the open air. The result was a product as hard as a board that could be stored for years without losing its nutritional properties. Meat was also preserved using salt and smoke. Smoking was one of the most reliable methods of preservation. Smoke not only dehydrated the product, but also impregnated it with substances that prevented the growth of bacteria. Dairy products played a huge role in their diet. Milk was processed into cheese and skyr, a fermented milk product similar to cottage cheese. These products could be stored for a very long time and were an important source of protein and fat. Grains such as barley and rye were carefully dried and stored in special pits or chests. They were used to make thick soups and porridges, which formed the basis of the daily diet. Bread was baked in the form of hard, flat cakes, which could also be stored for a long time.
This porridge warms the soul, doesn't it?
Aye. The gods have been kind with the harvest.
Root vegetables such as turnips, carrots, and onions were stored in cellars or simply buried in the ground below the frost line. This allowed them to stay fresh for most of the winter. Berries and mushrooms were dried to be used as additions to dishes. Fats were an essential part of the diet. Not only did they provide the body with the energy it needed to generate heat, but they were also used for lighting. Fat was a high-calorie fuel for both humans and their lamps. To quench their thirst and get extra calories, the Vikings brewed beer and ale. These drinks were thick, nutritious, and much safer than water from questionable sources. Winter evenings were often spent with a mug of warming ale. Thus, although the Viking winter table was not particularly varied, it was well balanced for survival in the cold. The high protein, fat, and carbohydrate content provided the necessary energy. A well-organized system of food storage made it possible to survive even the harshest season. What if I showed you how the Vikings defeated darkness without a single light bulb in the modern sense? In addition to the central hearth, which provided the main light, the Scandinavians used simple but effective lamps. These were small stone or clay bowls filled with fat. Fish oil or marine mammal fat served as fuel. A wick made of moss or twisted fabric was placed in the bowl. Such a lamp burned for a long time, although it gave off a dim, smoky light and a specific smell. This light was sufficient for doing small jobs in those corners of the house that were not reached by the flame of the hearth. By the light of such lamps, women spun and men carved. Every lumen of light was worth its weight in gold. Winter was not a time of idleness, but of hard work. It was a period of indoor work, when everything that would be needed in the next season was created and repaired. Men repaired fishing nets, made axe handles, and sharpened weapons. Women were engaged in textile production, which was one of the most important sectors of the economy. They combed and spun wool, and then created durable fabric on vertical looms. From it, they sewed clothes for the family and huge sails for dracars.
We need more weight on this edge.
Hurry, before the gust takes it!
All right, lift that timber higher.
The long, dark evenings were a time for stories. Skalds, professional poets, and storytellers were welcome guests in any home. They recited long sagas about gods and heroes, entertaining and educating at the same time. In addition to sagas, board games such as Hnefa Tafel, a strategy game similar to chess, were popular. Archaeologists find game boards and pieces throughout the Scandinavian world. It was an intellectual pastime that brightened the long wait for spring. Music was also part of winter life. Simple instruments such as bone flutes, lyres, and drums accompanied songs and tales. Music and stories supported cultural identity and strengthened social bonds. Thus, the Vikings did not simply wait passively for winter to pass. They filled it with meaning, work, and creativity. It was an active struggle against darkness, in which craftsmanship, art, and games were their weapons. What do you think the sagas told to raise morale on the darkest nights? In the next chapter, you will learn about the hygiene practices that were necessary for survival in cramped quarters. Contrary to popular stereotypes about dirty barbarians, the Vikings were surprisingly clean for their era. They understood perfectly well that in the crowded conditions of a longhouse, hygiene was not a luxury, but a matter of survival. Disease could spread at lightning speed in a closed community. One of the central elements of their hygiene culture was the bathhouse, or badstue. It was a small building where stones were heated and water was splashed on them to create steam. Steam treatments helped cleanse the skin and relax the muscles. The bathing ritual was regular, often weekly. It was not only a hygienic procedure, but also an important social event.
Walked straight out into the snow wearing nothing but the hat. You're joking. I wish I was.
Did you hear about the harvest? It seems the gods have been generous this year.
The Rust trade route is secure, but the Franks offer better silver.
Only if we guarantee safe passage through the fjords.
People met, socialized, and discussed business in the bathhouse. Archaeologists have found plenty of evidence of their love of cleanliness. Viking graves often contain bone or horn combs, tweezers, and even special sticks for cleaning ears. These items were personal possessions and accompanied their owners even after death. They regularly washed their hair and groomed their beards and mustaches, which were often braided into intricate plaits. The Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan, who encountered the Vikings, noted with surprise that they combed their hair daily. They also tried to keep their clothes clean. Woolen items were washed in cold water using urine as an alkaline detergent. Linen was bleached in the sun. Although the interior of the longhouse was smoky and dark, they tried to keep it clean. Old straw was periodically raked from the floor and replaced with fresh straw. This helped to combat debris and unpleasant odors. Of course, their ideas about cleanliness were very different from modern ones. However, compared to many other peoples of that time, the Vikings stood out for their concern for their appearance and personal hygiene. This habit undoubtedly helped them stay healthy in the harsh winter conditions. The long polar night was not only a physical, but also a difficult psychological test. The lack of sunlight, confined space, and constant cold could lead to depression and apathy. The Vikings had their own ways of dealing with this invisible enemy. The Yule festival occupied a central place in the winter calendar. It was a major celebration of the winter solstice that lasted several days. It marked a turning point when the days began to grow longer again, bringing hope for the return of spring. During Yule, large feasts were held. Sacrifices were made to the gods, and ritual bonfires were lit. It was a time of merriment that dispelled the gloom and despondency. The holiday united the community and gave people emotional release. Their complex mythology also helped them make sense of what was happening. The harsh winter was associated with the world of ice giants, and the return of warmth with the victory of the gods. These stories gave meaning to their struggle and instilled confidence in the ultimate triumph of life.
And so the great wolf, Fenrir, burst his chains, his jaws opening wide enough to swallow the very moon.
Belief in fate, or fatum, also played an important role. Vikings believed that their path was predetermined and accepted difficulties as a matter of course. This fatalistic worldview helped them remain steadfast in the face of any trials. Rituals and ceremonies structured time and brought order to the chaos of winter. They marked important moments, gave a sense of control and connection to higher powers. It was a psychological support in a world full of uncertainty. Telling sagas by the hearth was not just entertainment. It was a way of passing on knowledge, moral norms, and a sense of pride in one's family. Stories about the exploits of ancestors inspired and taught resilience.
These scars are not defeats. but the very legends themselves. The glory of our fathers carved in wood and steel.
Thus, the psychology of survival was no less important than the physical aspects. Faith, rituals, and a strong sense of community created a strong mental shield. It protected the Viking mind from the destructive effects of the long, dark winter.
Spirits of the flame.
Winter was not a time of hibernation for the Vikings. On the contrary, it was the most intense period of craft activity. The longhouse was transformed into one large workshop, where everyone was busy with important work.
Gently now, follow the line. Yes, just like that.
It was in winter that the fleet was prepared for future voyages. In large longhouses or special boathouses, men repaired the drakkars damaged during the previous season. They replaced planks, caulked cracks with resin, and prepared the ships for launch.
She's ready for the spring.
At the same time, work was underway on the weapons. Blacksmiths worked in their workshops, forging new swords, axes, and spearheads. The other warriors sharpened their weapons and repaired their shields and armor. Women's work was no less important. The production of sailcloth was a strategic task, as the speed and maneuverability of ships depended on the sails. Women spun threads and wove hundreds of square meters of durable woolen fabric. In addition to global tasks, everyday tasks were also taken care of. New dishes, spoons, and bowls were carved from wood. Combs, knife handles, and game pieces were made from bone and horn. Children learned crafts by watching the adults work. They helped as best they could, passing knowledge from generation to generation. The winter months were the main school of life for a young Viking.
The cold wind howls, but the fire keeps us safe.
Yes, and we must teach the young ones how to keep it burning.
This continuous, purposeful activity was of great importance. It not only provided the community with everything it needed, but also created a sense of purpose. Each member of the community contributed to the common future. Thus, winter was not the end, but the beginning of a new cycle. It was a time to gather strength, resources, and knowledge. Successful survival in winter guaranteed prosperity in summer. The end of winter was a long-awaited event. The appearance of the first rays of the sun after a long darkness was met with jubilation. It was a time of rituals dedicated to the rebirth of nature and the victory of life over death.
We welcome the spring. We welcome the light.
With the melting of the snow and the opening of the fjords from the ice, an active phase of life began. Everything that had been done and prepared during the winter now found its use. Repaired ships were launched. It was time for agriculture. The fields were ploughed and sown with barley and rye. The harvest determined how well fed the next winter would be. For warriors, the season of campaigns began. Drakkars, equipped with new sails, set off for distant lands for trade or raids. Winter preparations now had to bear fruit. Life spilled out of the cramped longhouses into the open air. People enjoyed the warmth and light they had been deprived of for so long. The rhythm of life changed dramatically, becoming faster and more dynamic. The awakening of nature symbolized the cyclical nature of their world. The Vikings lived in harmony with these cycles, subordinating their lives to the changing seasons. Winter was a time of accumulation, and summer was a time of realization. Their ability to survive in extreme conditions was based on this deep understanding of nature. They did not try to conquer it, but learned from it, adapting and using its laws to their advantage. This was the main secret of their resilience. we can see that Viking survival in winter was a complex, multi-layered system. It included unique architecture, well-designed clothing, effective food preparation methods, and most importantly, strong social bonds and psychological resilience. They turned their homes into warm shelters and the long dark months into a time of creation and preparation. Their experience proves that human ingenuity and adaptability know no bounds. They didn't just survive winter, they used it as a strategic advantage to emerge stronger and more prepared in the spring. It's a harsh but inspiring lesson in resilience from the true masters of the North. Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. Which era or civilization interests you the most? And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our new historical investigations.